Janelle Brown left the Brown family's everyday life between 2001 and 2006, and what appeared to be a void in her narrative served as the basis for all that eventually came to light in Sister Wives. Separation marked the start of the Wyoming years. While the family was still unstable and fragile, Janelle cut off her relationship with Cody. The marriage was already beginning to exhibit cracks, with Cody bouncing between them with a restless energy, Mary maintaining her role as the first wife, and Christine acting as the nurturer. Although Janelle's departure appeared to be an absence, it was actually a calculated move. She was looking for security for herself and her kids, and she wouldn't go back until she had found it. The mortgage was in Janelle's name when the Browns moved into the large Lehigh home in Utah. Hey, hello, everybody. Welcome back to my channel TLC Flicks. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. The roof over everyone's heads was practically made possible by her financial contribution. Cody relied on Janelle for survival, while he relied on Christine for emotional approval. The imbalance that would determine the family's future was brought about by this dual dependence, money from one and affection from the other. Cody secretly loathed the wife who kept him bound financially, but he preferred where his heart felt most at ease. 2 of Janelle's children were born during this time, Savannah in 2004 and Gabriel in 2001. Favoritism already skewed the home when they arrived. Though their childhoods were characterized by being ignored, Janelle reared them with quiet steadiness. They sensed, even in their early years, what would later be indisputable, that their father could change, divert, or withdraw his attention whenever he wanted. The dynamics had solidified by 2006, when Janelle made a complete comeback. Although the family was built on her sacrifices, her standing was already under jeopardy. The mother heart role had been won by Christine. Despite being diminished, Mary's position as the first wife had symbolic significance. Furthermore, Cody's preference for one wife over all the others was no longer concealed when Robin moved in a few years later. Rather, it was firmly established. Since Janelle had experienced favoritism long before the cameras were rolling, she had anticipated it. This early imbalance was reflected in the fallout from Michael T. Echoing the annoyance of kids who grew up witnessing their father's inconsistent attention, Christine's daughter rebelled against Cody's authority. The dynamic Janelle had known since 2001 eventually burst when the COVID years arrived. Cody imposed stringent regulations, requiring allegiance and obedience. As a result of Janelle's resistance, her son Gabriel came to represent rebellion against a father who had long given preference to some kids over others. In retrospect, 2001 to 2006, the so-called missing years, were not missing at all. The blueprint was them. The circumstances for everything that followed, Cody's favoritism, Robin's ascent, the children's divisions, and the family's public disintegration during the COVID era, were set by Janelle's separation, her financial sacrifice, the birth of her children, and her unwavering perseverance. The winter air in Wyoming was abrasive, reminding you of your distance from warmth as it pressed against your lungs. That cold wasn't limited to the exterior of the Brown home. It was inside as well, lingering in the silence between Janelle and Cody and resting in the spaces between the women. For months, Janelle had been observing the trend. With restless energy, Cody circled the spouses in wide circles, constantly seeking attention but never settling down. There was duty and history with Mary. There was consolation and unceasing praise with Christine. However, with her, there was only usefulness with Janelle. She was now the calm one. The one who worked, kept the finances in order, and never made excessive demands. But today, even that job felt intolerable. Because she was more than just a background wife in 2001. In addition, she had a new son. That year, Gabriel had come, frail and little, in need of the type of consistent affection that only she seemed willing to provide. However, Janelle felt isolated as a mother rather than supported. Cody never stayed long enough to feel like a partner, but he was there when it was needed. Grand gestures, smiles for the family camera. His focus shifted to Mary's complaints, Christine's boundless energy, and anything other than her calm stability. The choice was the result of the strain. Janelle folded the kids' clothes, packed a few boxes, and loaded them into the back of her car. She didn't make a dramatic announcement about her departure. She didn't argue. She just shifted. Christine wept in private, divided between fear of Janelle's absence and loyalty to her sister wife. With her arms folded tightly across her chest, Mary watched with a hard edge, as though Janelle's departure was both a betrayal and validation of all her suspicions. But more than rage, Cody's disinterest ached as he stood in the doorway. With his arms folded across his chest in a clipped tone, he added, "Janelle, do what you have to do. I'll take care of the family." No argument could penetrate the depths of such words, because they conveyed the implicit reality that he didn't consider her to be necessary. She wasn't the family's lifeblood in his opinion. He considered her interchangeable. Thus, with Gabriel in her arms and her other kids huddled around, Janelle departed Wyoming. She was gone long enough, but not forever. Enough to keep her kids safe, to breathe without choking, and to envision a time when she wouldn't require Cody to live. Her divorce in 2001 was more than a brief breakup. It was the initial version of a plan she would adhere to for many years. Endurance, self-reliance, and silent sacrifice. She had no idea how those roles would be twisted into something that would define her entire family in the years to come. However, she knew deep down that she would vanish if she stayed as she drove away into the Wyoming winter. She could build if she went away. So she decided to go. When the year 2002 rolled around, there were no fireworks to greet it. That silence was a burden and a relief to Janelle. She no longer had to endure Cody's unrelenting scrutiny or witness his unequal distribution of his affections among his wives. The absence, however, also weighed heavily on her, reminding her daily that she was, in many respects, alone. She got up early to get ready for work, frequently before sunrise. Carrying the burden of financial duty, Janelle slipped out into the chilly early air, while other wives juggled the rhythm of the home. Even though she was no longer completely a part of the family's everyday routine, her paycheck ended up being the unseen thread that kept them all together. The kids adjusted in ways that only kids can. Her eldest, Logan, immediately learned how to assist. Madison's independence reflected that of her mother. Hunter was quiet yet steady, still quite young. Gabriel, scarcely able to walk, served as a gentle reminder that despite the seeming fragility of the foundation, life continued on. Janelle maintained order in her universe. Children, work, bills, meals, go to sleep, then do it again. Its structure was mechanical, almost reassuring. However, she harbored a persistent feeling that the family she had selected was fracturing into several realities. Cody was greatly dependent on Christine back in Wyoming, who filled the voids with her unending energy. Cody gave Christine attention since she flourished on providing warmth and nurturing. Mary remained in the background, her marital relationship with Cody tense but unyielding, her anger boiling. The balance between them was altered by Janelle's absence, but in actuality, it also gave previous dynamics the opportunity to intensify uncontrolled. The imbalance was unavoidable whenever Janelle came back for visits or family get-togethers. Cody gave her a courteous greeting, but his gaze were detached, as if she were a part of the building but not of his heart. Even though she was the one paying the bills, she could sense it in the little things, like the way he leaned in Christine's direction when he laughed, and the way he quickly ignored her financial proposals with the phrase, "We'll figure it out." Nothing seemed wrong to the outside world. The Browns remained united, continued to raise their children, and remained steadfast in their belief in multiple marriage. Janelle, however, was aware of what others were missing, that she was evolving into the backbone without ever being acknowledged as such. It was she who worked in silence, paid in silence, and maintained the stability of the foundation. Still, she remained silent. She persevered. Since gaining love wasn't important to her survival, she forced herself to swallow her bitterness and keep going. It was about ensuring her kids were nourished, safe, and well cared for. The year 2002 wasn't particularly noteworthy. It wasn't a bomb. There was silence. But the blueprint became deeper in that silence. Janelle was already creating her role in invisible ink. The woman who took the burden while others took the stage, the provider, the stabilizer. Those who hadn't lived through 2002 would be startled when the world watched sister wives fall apart on television years later. No, Janelle wouldn't. She was aware of the partiality. She had experienced the unbalance firsthand. She also knew long before the cameras started to roll that she would never receive the same compensation for her sacrifices. The Browns were prepared for something greater by 2003. With so many kids and so many unfulfilled hopes, the cramped quarters in Wyoming had felt like cages, the tension too close, the air too thin. The goal was to relocate to Utah, where there appeared to be more prospects and a slightly more promising future. However, dreams are expensive. Additionally, the Browns were always in need of money. At that moment, Janelle came forward with the calm pragmatism that characterized her without being overt or demanding recognition. It was she who possessed the credit score, work history, and financial reliability. Her name was therefore on the line when it came time to obtain the family's greatest advancement, a huge home in Lehi with 3 separate living areas. The documents were signed by Janelle. The mortgage was borne by Janelle. Cody had an electric energy on the day they moved in. Admiring the house's capacity to accommodate their large family, he boasted about it. As Christine imagined her kids roaming through its corridors, her eyes glistened. Mary looked about the rooms calculatingly, assessing what she would claim as hers. Janelle, too? She felt a silent weight as she observed them all. Yes, the house was lovely, but it cost money. Her signature bonded her to the family more firmly than any love commitment ever could, and it lay squarely on her back. She was now more than simply a wife. She was the Browns' future guarantor. It was difficult to overlook the irony, though. Cody was proud of our house, but he hardly ever stated whose credit had bought it. Although Janelle's work outside the house paid for the walls she decorated, Christine immersed herself into housework. Mary complained about justice and space, but Janelle was the one who had made space possible. Her sacrifice was not acknowledged or celebrated. Rather, the disparity just became more obvious. Mary's drama and Christine's warmth were the objects of Cody's attention, while Janelle was the stable rock in the background. She was accountable but never rewarded. Since she already understood better than to demand Cody's thanks, she offered without expecting anything in return. At night, when the home was finally quiet, Janelle would stand by herself in the kitchen, listening to the muffled noises of children sleeping upstairs and the hum of the refrigerator. She would consider the mortgage documents hidden somewhere, with her name written in black ink. It was more than a house. She had proof. Evidence shows, despite Cody's denial, she was essential. Evidence that she could sustain a whole family without any fanfare. However, there was also another reality. Janelle had tied herself to Cody in ways that were more difficult to break by signing her name and financially committing to the Browns. Love might wane. Dedication may falter. However, debt? You were chained by debt. And she knew in her heart that although Cody would never appreciate her heart, he would never relinquish her usefulness. She would always have a place in the family as long as she could support them, and as long as her credit could help them achieve their goals, but not in the way she desired. For the Browns, the Lehi house was a victory. However, it also served as a warning to Janelle. She was erecting a house that might never be able to provide her with true shelter. For Janelle, 2004 was a year of regeneration and tiredness. Her mind was burdened with financial worries, domestic conflicts, and the never-ending balancing act of being the practical wife, while her body was burdened with the responsibility of another child. The birth of Savannah ought to have been a happy occasion that united the family. There was always that hope when a new life began, that perhaps, just perhaps, a kid could bridge the gaps between the adults. However, the truth was more difficult, silent, and isolated. Janelle held her baby daughter close to her chest in the hospital room. Savannah's breaths were rhythmic and shallow, and her little fingers curled automatically. Christine was standing close by, providing consolation and energy, her inherent warmth radiating throughout the space. However, Cody was gone for extended periods of time, both physically and mentally. With the restless energy that had always characterized him, he moved fluidly in and out, smiling and posing quickly but never remaining long enough to sit in the silence that Janelle required. She was intensely aware of the disparity. Flashes provided her with presence, not constancy, where she needed a partner. She recalled uttering assurances that no one else could hear while gazing down at Savannah's fragile face. "I'll be stable. I'll be present. I will be even if he isn't." It was survival, not merely a pledge. Deep down, Janelle understood that her children would depend on her much more than they would ever be able to on their father. Back at the Lehigh house, Christine's children rushed around the hallways, causing mayhem and joy. Mary maintained her distance from others, guarding her area and alternating between resentment and control. Janelle, too? After her hospital stay, she quickly reverted to her previous responsibilities, working when she could, taking care of the family's invisible scaffolding and keeping her newborn close. However, the disparity became more apparent after Savannah arrived. Cody lavished Christine's mothering with love. He avoided Mary's erratic behavior. His dealings with Janelle, however, were transactional and pragmatic. Have you paid the bill? Are we able to pay the mortgage? How's work going? Infrequently, how are you? I seldom ever love you. Despite her father's intermittent presence, Savannah grew up in her mother's arms, encircled by her siblings and encased in Christine's bustle. Even her children were being drawn into the hierarchy of Cody's lopsided devotion, as Janelle could plainly see. When Gabriel was younger, he tried to get his father's attention but frequently failed. Savannah would now also understand as she grew up the distinction between a father's title and his behavior. When the kids were asleep at night, Janelle would sit by herself and rock Savannah, her thoughts racing. She had brought another child into the family's fold, adding to the vast fabric of multiple marriages. She still felt unnoticed. Her heart bled because she wanted her kids to have a father who was there, reliable, and constant, not because she needed Cody's adulation. But she was aware that their father would be tougher. He would pick favorites, show affection in different ways, and withdraw as soon as he showed signs of devotion. By 2004, Janelle had stopped deceiving herself about finding equilibrium. She embraced her role as the breadwinner, the silent powerhouse, and the mother who filled the void. The family's divisions did not go away with Savannah's entrance. It further exposed them. And as Janelle gazed into her infant's eyes, she realized what she had always known but had never expressed out loud. I, not him, will provide security for my kids. Children rushing through corridors, footsteps thumping up and down staircases, and voices resonating against walls that Janelle still silently paid for were all part of the incessant noise that pervaded the Lehigh home by 2005. It appeared to be a house full of life, joy, and faith from the outside. However, lines were being drawn inside, lines that only children could perceive before adults acknowledged their existence. Janelle noticed it in the way her older children started to gauge their father's attention like a limited resource, and in the subtle looks they exchanged. Her oldest child, Logan, had already assumed duties more appropriate for a parent than a child. Madison became more observant and self-reliant in ways that both pleased and unsettled her mother. Hunter, calm yet reserved, appeared to suppress his feelings, as if preparing for failure. And Gabriel, who was still only a toddler, clung to Janelle with the intense devotion of a child who knew deep down that his father's presence was inconsistent rather than constant. Favoritism, meanwhile, started to become more obvious. Christine's kids reveled in Cody's enthusiasm. He enjoyed playing with them, laughing with them, and appreciating Christine's position as their ongoing caretaker. Despite frequently being marginalized, Mary made sure her only child, Mariah, always got her father's undivided attention. Then there were the others, the kids who took in the unbalance in silence. They weren't first in queue, but they weren't unloved either. Children always observe who is selected and who is left out, even if they are unable to express it. Michael T., Christine's daughter, was one of them. Perceptive, feisty, and sensitive, she was acutely aware of the imbalance. Although Cody was capable of showing her affection, she also observed when his focus shifted, when other siblings appeared to be more important, and when the balance of affection shifted in ways she was unable to control. She started to harbor resentment, a seed that would eventually grow into outright rebellion, though it wasn't yet audible. Janelle saw these shadows all around her. She observed how Christine filled in for Cody, bridging his absences with endless enthusiasm. She watched while Mary sharpened, holding on to her place like a title. She also witnessed how her own kids started to realize, even subconsciously, that their father's affection wasn't a given. Sometimes at night, when everything had subsided, Janelle would watch her kids sleep and feel the weight of it all. Despite her hard work, taking on the mortgage, bearing the financial burden, and giving birth and raising a child. She was unable to shield them from the one thing they most desired: a stable, reliable, and equitable father. Perhaps Cody didn't notice it, or he didn't want to. His charm was a salve for every wound, and he went through the home as if his presence were sufficient. Janelle, however, was wiser. She was aware that smiles couldn't mend the underlying hurts. Favoritism was no longer concealed by 2005. The kids could feel it in their bones, even if it wasn't quite explosive. Standing quietly in the midst of it all, Janelle realized something that few people did. This wasn't a passing phase. The pattern was this. The blueprint was this. By 2005, what started out as fissures in 2001 had grown into fault lines. Janelle could already sense the soft rumble of the collapse that would occur years later, even though the Browns were still standing. The Browns had become more established in Lehigh by 2006. Children, routines, and incessant needs filled the house. The family appeared more together than before, but below the well-preserved image, Janelle could no longer deny the reality. Her position had been decided. Janelle didn't make a big splash when she reintegrated into the family's orbit. No remarks were given, and the years she had silently carried the most difficult tasks were not acknowledged. As if nothing had changed, she just slipped back into her place. To the others, it appeared normal. It was like capitulation to her. Christine had solidified her position as the family's emotional center. She was the wife who was always complimenting Cody, boosting his self-esteem, and providing him with warmth. She was the mother who immersed herself into nurturing. Mary held fast to her symbolic position as the first wife, and although her relationship with Cody was tense, it was shielded by her title and history. Janelle, too? She was the one who provided, stabilized, and made selfless sacrifices. The mortgage still had her name on it. The shortfalls were nevertheless covered by her paycheck. The house continued to function due to her silent fortitude. Her yearning for connection, however, was still unfulfilled. She observed how Cody's attention brightened in her presence, and how he leaned into Christine's laughter during family get-togethers. She observed his careful handling of Mary's emotions, his constant caution, and his constant awareness of the delicate glass separating them. And it made sense when he looked at Janelle at her. Like a business. Have you settled that bill? How are things at work? Is this something we can afford? Despite being essential, she wasn't loved. These trends were also evident in the kids. Her elder children, who carried some of their father's responsibilities, had become increasingly independent, almost too soon. Now a little kid, Gabriel continued to hold on to her hand while keeping a cautious eye on the outside world. And tiny Savannah, curled up in her mother's arms, served as yet another reminder of the silent vows Janelle made each day that she would be dependable and not let them down, even if Cody strayed. By 2006, the family's blueprint was set in stone. The sacrifices made by Janelle served as unseen scaffolding. Christine's warmth served as the public expression of love. Mary's title was unchallenged. As restless as usual, Cody navigated everything as though the imbalance was inevitable, even predetermined. Janelle did not resist. She didn't yell or ask to be acknowledged. She didn't do that. Rather, she persevered, as her strength had always been perseverance. However, she felt in her heart that the fissures that had appeared in 2001 were now fault lines. And the house they all shared, her house, would eventually start to fall apart under the strain of partiality and disregard. Viewers believed they were witnessing the Brown story unfold in real time as the cameras rolled and Sister Wives became a television phenomenon years later. Janelle, however, was wiser. The narrative had been composed years earlier, in the silent hallways of 2001 to 2006. She had witnessed the emergence of the hierarchy, the favoritism, and the rifts. Before anyone ever bothered to look, she had experienced them. In 2010, Robin joined the family, but Janelle wasn't shocked. Robin's presence confirmed what she already knew. Cody would always pick a favorite and focus on one wife while the others took care of the rest. That pattern didn't start with Robin. She was the evidence for it. Throughout Christine's years as the object of Cody's love, Janelle had put up with the prototype. She now observed Robin honing it. The youngsters were also affected by the fallout. Eventually, Christine's daughter Michael T. rebelled, expressing the same annoyances that Janelle's kids had been suppressing. She fought against the unbalanced, controlling, and never-ending dance of appeasing a father who was unable to be equally present. On television, what appeared to be an act of impulsive defiance was actually the blossoming of long-sown seeds. When the COVID years arrived, the facade was no longer able to hold. Cody enforced his rigid, oppressive regulations, which demanded compliance and allegiance. However, Janelle's kids resisted, particularly Gabriel and Garrison. Pandemic regulations weren't the only reason for their opposition. Being second best, witnessing favoritism control their family dynamic, and realizing their father's love was conditional were all part of it. Janelle's decision to oppose Cody in order to protect her kids wasn't an unexpected display of courage. It was the inevitable result of decades of silent perseverance at last finding its voice. The 2001 to 2006 blueprint had been made public. There was nothing lacking about the so-called missing years. The scene had been established by them. The quiet framework of the family story had been the birth of Gabriel and Savannah, Janelle's separation in Wyoming, her financial sacrifice in Lehigh, and the specters of favoritism. The visible house was all that the world witnessed afterward, along with Robin's ascent, the kids' rebellion, and the collapse due to COVID. Long ago, Janelle was aware that she had set the groundwork for it, and when she turned to face the past, she realized clearly that she had not disappeared. She had constructed. And standing on the unseen labor of her years of absence was the family that everyone believed they knew. The Lehigh mansion had turned both a jail and a blessing by 2007. It was too small to retain the mounting tension, yet it was large enough to accommodate them all. Yes, the walls were filled with laughter, but they were also filled with slammed doors, whispers, and the silent anguish of kids who were starting to realize how their father really was. At times, Janelle navigated it like a ghost, solid and grounded, constantly working and supplying. The goal of having multiple families was maintained by her paychecks, which also kept the lights on and food on the table. However, she was aware of how little Cody valued her presence even as she gave him her salary. She was necessary yet unloved. Not selected, but needed. Christine had emerged as the household's bright spot. She had power because of her contagious warmth, unending devotion, and capacity to feed Cody's ego. The kids loved her, and Cody gave them his attention in return. Christine's room in the Lehigh house was a hive of activity and love. Meanwhile, Mary became increasingly reclusive. Although neither of them would publicly acknowledge it, the tension between her and Cody grew. Their relationship was fragile, symbolic, and historical. Janelle could see it in the angular edges of Mary's words and in her gaze. The year when Janelle started to feel the burden of permanence was 2007. The years of separation had been about surviving, about letting go when she needed to breathe. The mortgage, the kids, and the unsaid fact that her function as a provider was too valuable to be released, however, now served as her anchors. She had to untangle everything she had fought so hard to keep together before she could leave. She was unable to ignore the family's growing fractures, though. Her kids were maturing, becoming more perceptive. Under his armor of duty, Logan yearned for a parent who recognized his achievements. Even at her age, Madison's anger ignited against the injustices she saw. Hunter hardened himself and retreated even more. Savannah and Gabriel, who were still young, silently took it all in. The partiality had become overt. The kids observed, whispered to each other, and compared who caught Cody's attention, who made him laugh, and who didn't. Although she was aware of the reality, Janelle made an effort to protect them and to reassure them that their father loved them. Now, the shadows she had endured since 2001 were influencing the following generation. 2007 wasn't the year of collapse just yet. Later, under the scrutiny of cameras and the weight of celebrity, it would happen. However, it was the year that the foundation moved in ways that were irreparable. Inside, the pattern Janelle had sketched years earlier was now evident in the rifts in her children's hearts, despite the house's grandeur in Lehigh. Janelle sensed deep down that this family would not last forever. By 2008, the Browns lived in a contrasting home in Lehigh. It appeared to be a picture of harmony to outsiders, a large family, active kids, and a man with 4 wives who lived, the principal. However, the fissures deepened within. More than ever, money was scarce. Janelle's work barely kept them afloat. Each month was a whispered prayer that the numbers would stretch, a sacrifice, and a calculation. Responsibility had been the cornerstone of her existence, yet it never got any easier. She didn't see a spouse with the same weight when she glanced at Cody. She saw a dreamer, restless, and yearning for something greater than the daily grind she endured. Even the kids sensed it. Now unquestionably the eldest, Logan had taken on the role of a second father to his siblings. Janelle could see the fatigue and need for independence in his eyes, even though he didn't often complain. Madison's acerbic remarks cut through family gatherings as she publicly reacted to the inequity. Hunter retreated farther, and even as little boys, Gabriel and Garrison started to exhibit signs of disobedience. Ever the nurturer, Christine continued to be the center of the home. Her light was wavering, though. She was burdened by the never-ending childcare, the scarcity of finances, and the emotional toll of constantly attempting to hold Cody's interest. Resentment simmered beneath her smile. That year, Mary's resentment grew. Even while no one dared to speak it out, everyone knew that her marriage to Cody was more precarious than ever. Like static, the tension in the Lehigh house's walls was ready to burst at the slightest spark. What about Cody? He couldn't sleep. Always agitated. The house seemed overcrowded and too small. The never-ending financial burden choked him. He desired growth, liberty, and opportunity. He spoke out loud about his dreams of larger homes and chances to escape the grind. He was already seeing past the spouses who had created his existence for him and past the walls of Lehigh. 2008 turned become a year filled with rumors. Discussions about transformation. Rumors regarding their family's ability to continue living this way. Questions that hung in the air like smoke but were never directly addressed. It was a year of reckoning for Janelle. She sensed the storm building. For years, her missing years served as the unseen glue that kept her family together. However, something bigger than her stamina and something that even her pragmatism couldn't control was about to happen. She had carried the blueprint since 2001, and it was nearly finished. The scene was prepared. Robin was also waiting in the wings, even though she was unaware of it at the time. The Browns' world started to tilt in 2009. Once a representation of success, the Lehigh house had devolved into a stress-filled financial cage. Children, laughter, and mayhem filled every room. Yet there were also arguments, slammed doors, and silent sobs. The financial situation was worse than before. Janelle's income was no longer sufficient to cover the expanding demands of almost 24 people. She wore it in the stiffness of her shoulders and the creases that formed on her face as the pressure increased every day. Meanwhile, Cody was falling apart. On the inside, he was restless and itched to get away, but he covered it up with excitement, with outbursts of optimism and lofty promises. He frequently mentioned new opportunities, but nobody was certain what he meant. Years previously, when they were separated in Wyoming, Janelle had witnessed that gaze. It was the expression of a guy looking for something more than what he had. The family's emotional burden rested on Christine, but her joy had faded. She battled fatigue, envy, and the nagging feeling that she could no longer hold Cody's heart. Her days were occupied by raising her kids, but her nights were long and filled with uncertainty. Mary had reached a breaking point as well. Her interactions with Cody had become acrid and icy, and their relationship had grown fragile. Like a second skin, loneliness enveloped her. Before anybody else could acknowledge it, she saw that the family as they knew it was untenable. The older kids had grown out of their childhood. As he got ready for college, Logan struggled to balance his intense desire to start his own life with his commitment to his family. Now, Madison openly questioned her father's decisions and put his power to the test. Silence had sharpened Hunter's remoteness. The allegiance of the next generation was being strained by the partiality they all witnessed but no one mentioned. And then there was a hint of something fresh. A contact. An opportunity. A family in Utah who desired to have their narrative captured on film. Cody jumped at the thought, his eyes blazing with the same restless fervor that had fueled all of his previous reckless decisions. He saw the cameras as a chance for recognition, approval, and possibly even salvation. They were a gamble to Janelle. She was too exhausted to fight, though. Tension was as high as fog as the year came to a conclusion. Unpaid bills. Relationships are deteriorating. Youngsters escaping their father's grasp. The silent understanding that something had to give. The collapse did not occur in 2009. However, the Browns were standing on the edge of the precipice, looking into the unknown. Let us know in your comments. And stay tuned by subscribing our channel to get more updates like this. Thanks everyone.